Today we get into an extraordinary and unsettling document titled, quote, Empowerment by Virtue of Golden Truth Human Cloning, specifically REM-driven human cloning full disclosure, end quote, by Donald Marshall. This extensive text, published in October 2015, makes some truly astonishing claims about advanced hidden technologies and their alleged use for widespread abuse. Eloise, Marshall presents his work as a whistleblowing disclosure intended to empower people against what he describes as tyranny. How does he lay the groundwork for such a grand and, frankly, unbelievable assertion?
Marshall frames his disclosure by referencing UK whistleblowing legislation, specifically the Public Interest Disclosure Act of 1998 and the Serious Crime Act of 2015. He states his claims meet all criteria for a qualifying disclosure, including the commission of criminal offenses, failure to comply with legal obligations, miscarriages of justice, endangered health and safety, environmental damage, and the deliberate concealment of such information. He even implies that anyone attempting to discredit him could face legal repercussions under these acts, suggesting his claims are factual and verifiable.
That's a bold claim, essentially challenging doubters to disprove him at their own risk. But the core of his argument hinges on the idea of incredibly advanced technology kept secret. How does he convince us that such technologies like human cloning are not just science fiction?
He relies heavily on the testimony of key figures who were supposedly insiders. First, there is Phil Schneider, a geologist and engineer with a Level 3 security clearance who worked on black projects and deep underground military bases, or DUMBs. Schneider claimed that military technology outstrips public technology at an incredible rate. Quote, 44 to 45 years of technology for every calendar year which passes, end quote. If you apply that rate since, say, 1945, Marshall suggests military technology would be over 3,000 years more advanced than what the public sees today. This sets a powerful precedent for believing in almost any technological leap, no matter how outlandish.
A 44-year advancement rate per calendar year is a truly staggering figure. So, what specific advanced technologies does Marshall present, and how do they connect to a central claim about human cloning?
He details several memory suppression technologies, which can use light or gene modification to erase or restore memories, mind voice technology, capable of reading, listening to, or broadcasting inner thoughts, HARP, or the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, which he claims can disrupt mental processes, manipulate weather, and control minds. Then there is RFID microchip technology, which he states can be implanted to link individuals' brains to satellites and supercomputers, leading to total control over their physical functions, mental processes, and even dreams. Finally, he discusses MKUltra, the CIA's mind control program, which he says has evolved to use these microchips for remote monitoring, artificial telepathy, and programming individuals for specific actions, even murder.
This paints a picture of pervasive, almost absolute technological control. But how does human cloning fit into this array of capabilities? Are we talking about a new kind of cloning, different from what we typically understand?
Marshall distinguishes between two types: replication cloning, which is giving birth to a genetic identical, starting life as a baby, and duplication cloning, which is the concealed, advanced method. Duplication cloning involves taking just 2 cells from an individual, applying an electrical charge, and growing a fully formed duplicate clone body in a tank of salty water within about 5 months. He claims this process, similar to regenerative medicine, has been possible since 1945.
And this brings us to the most controversial aspect of his disclosure: REM-driven cloning and consciousness transfer. How does Marshall claim this mechanism works, and what does it imply about human identity and autonomy?
This is central to his experience. Marshall explains that when an original person enters REM sleep, typically 90 to 110 minutes after falling asleep, their consciousness is transferred to a pre-grown duplicate clone body located at a cloning center. While the original body remains asleep in bed, the clone wakes up at the center, fully aware and capable of action. He refers to this as Mark II REM-driven clones, which are sleep-driven clones. Marshall links this to philosopher John Locke's ideas on personal identity, where sameness of consciousness, not substance, defines who you are. He even cites Professor Henrik Eriksson's public research on body-swapping illusions as a parallel to how consciousness can be perceived in a different body, making these clone experiences feel real as real. What happens to the clone, torture, sex, or any experience, is then felt by the original body due to this linked consciousness, even if memories are suppressed.
So people could be experiencing severe abuse or participating in depraved acts in their sleep, completely unaware, yet suffering the physical and psychological consequences. This is a profoundly disturbing thought. What does Marshall say about his own experience with this REM-driven cloning?
He claims his ordeal began at age 5 after a foreskin removal, with tissues allegedly used to create his first duplicate clones. For 25 years, his memories of these experiences were suppressed, making him believe he just was not dreaming or suffered from unexplained illnesses. Once his memories were restored at age 30, he recalled being tortured, stabbed, sodomized, burned, and chained to coerce him into composing songs for the Illuminati. He states these tortures caused him lasting physical ailments, like a weak heart, due to the linked consciousness. Marshall asserts that this REM-driven cloning is used for sex, torture, and the plagiarism of talented individuals, citing movies like Inception as thinly veiled drip-feed disclosure by the Illuminati.
The scale of this alleged conspiracy is immense. Marshall names specific high-profile individuals as ringleaders and participants in these cloning center activities. Who are they, and what kinds of acts does he attribute to them?
Marshall explicitly names the royal family of England, Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Philip, and Prince Charles as the worst perpetrators, along with Vladimir Putin. He describes depraved acts, including the sexual abuse of clone children, ritualistic torture, and competitive displays of cruelty. He attributes Bernie Mac's death to continuous torture of his REM clone, leading to an aneurysm in his original body. Marshall claims Princess Diana was killed via a bright light in a car crash, followed by a salt injection in the hospital because she intended to marry an Arab. He even suggests Britney Spears' public breakdown was due to witnessing Picton murders, a Canadian serial killer's acts in her REM clone state, and her music videos subtly depict cloning. He also exposes the concept of selling your soul as actually selling the use of one's REM-driven clone for sex and torture in exchange for fame, with dire consequences for refusal, including the cloning of one's children and descendants.
This is an unbelievably dark vision of the world, suggesting a global elite engaged in systematic depravity through hidden technology. Beyond these horrific acts, what is the ultimate goal of the Illuminati, according to Marshall, and what is the deadline he mentions for humanity to act?
Marshall warns that the Illuminati's ultimate goal is a new world order involving total enslavement of humanity. This is to be achieved through the completion of a global HARP grid, which he claims will enable unparalleled mind control and even time travel. He estimates this HARP grid could be fully operational by 2017 to 2020. Once complete, he argues, humanity's free will would be permanently extinguished, and future generations would be unable to stop them because the Illuminati could simply rewind time to correct any mistakes. This, for Marshall, is humanity's only chance to act before it is too late.
So what does Donald Marshall propose as the solution? How can humanity, as he sees it, combat such an overwhelmingly powerful and secretive force? Marshall's call to action is clear
and urgent. He urges people not to panic, riot, or cause chaos, emphasizing that humanity will inherit the earth and should not destroy it. Instead, he asks everyone to spread this disclosure document until it reaches the armed forces. He believes that once military personnel understand the full extent of their government's corruption, they will stage a coup, disassemble the cloning centers, free victims, and redirect advanced technologies like HARP for the benefit of mankind. He envisions a golden age where cures for diseases and beneficial technologies are released and corrupt governments are replaced. He stresses that humanity outnumbers the Illuminati by 1,000,000 to 1, making them vulnerable if enough people are informed and act cohesively.
Donald Marshall's empowerment by virtue of golden truth human cloning, specifically REM-driven human cloning full disclosure, presents a truly extraordinary narrative of hidden technologies, deep state corruption, and an imminent threat to human autonomy. His plea for action, despite the profound skepticism such claims might generate, is rooted in the belief that the truth, no matter how unsettling, is ultimately liberating.
Indeed, he urges readers to research his claims, apply skepticism, optimism, and open-mindedness, and crucially, pay attention to their own dreams, or lack thereof, as potential signs of REM-driven cloning experiences.
If this episode opened your mind to new possibilities, consider sharing it with someone who values the pursuit of truth.
Today, we're diving into a deeply unsettling yet purportedly true account from Donald Marshall, detailed in his document exposing the Illuminati's REM-driven human cloning subculture, Volume 1. It's a collection of his answers to frequently asked questions, where he lays out claims about a secret, technologically advanced world of human cloning.
That's right. Marshall asserts that the Illuminati employs a sophisticated technology he calls REM-driven cloning. He describes this as a process where once a person enters REM sleep, their consciousness is transferred from their original body into a specially grown clone, which then comes to life at a secret cloning center. When the original person wakes up, the clone at the center goes limp noodle, as he puts it, becoming inanimate.
This immediately sounds like something out of a science fiction film, perhaps a nightmarish version of Avatar. What's the fundamental difference between what he calls REM-driven cloning and the more commonly understood idea of replication cloning, like Dolly the sheep, for instance?
Marshall explains a clear distinction. Replication cloning involves growing a clone from a baby, a genetic copy that develops independently and is always on. REM-driven cloning, however, is a form of duplication cloning. Here, the Illuminati takes DNA from an original person and uses regenerative science to grow a fully formed duplicate body, sometimes taking up to 5 months. He mentions these bodies are stored in warehouse-like rooms stacked in containers.
So the crucial part is the consciousness transfer, not just the physical duplicate. But if these are just clone bodies being tortured or used, how does that impact the original person, the one sleeping soundly in their bed, seemingly undisturbed?
This is where it becomes even more disturbing. Marshall claims that consciousness is linked. He states that torture inflicted on his REM-driven clone causes severe side effects in his original body, impacting his heart and causing symptoms similar to a stroke. He even mentions that the Illuminati monitors his vital signs at the cloning center, pushing him to the brink of a heart attack, but not quite killing him. He attributes Bernie Mac's death to this very process, alleging that constant, hours-long torture of Mac's REM-driven clones led to his death by aneurysm in his original body.
That's an incredibly bold claim, especially regarding public figures. It also raises the obvious question. If he's actively exposing these secrets, why hasn't the Illuminati simply silenced him? Why is he still alive and able to post on social media?
Marshall addresses this directly. He argues that his original body is always at a location far from the cloning center. The Illuminati can only access him when he's in REM sleep. He claims that they keep him alive because he's valuable to them. He states he was forced to create numerous hit songs, toy ideas, and movie concepts for them, which they then give to celebrities like Coldplay, Flo Rida, and Adam Levine. He believes they view him as an investment they don't want to destroy. He says that the Illuminati members, as REM-driven clones, even discussed deleting his Facebook account but decided against it, thinking nobody would believe his claims anyway.
A gift of melody under duress. This implies a massive global conspiracy. He mentions celebrities and world leaders attending these centers. What does he say about the crimes committed there?
He paints a gruesome picture. Marshall claims he witnessed horrific acts, including the torture and execution of children, both REM-driven clones and real children, with Illuminati members as clones watching and even masturbating to these deaths. He implicates Queen Elizabeth II and Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper in these atrocities, and claims he was forced to watch footage of the Robert Pickton murders at the cloning center, where Illuminati members cheered as prostitutes were killed.
These are truly monstrous allegations. The natural human reaction would be disbelief. How does Marshall differentiate these experiences from nightmares or vivid dreams?
He stresses the clarity of the experience. He says dreams are fuzzy and incoherent, whereas his REM-driven clone experiences are clear as daylight, linear, and he feels like he's literally waking up as a clone to experience the same physical Earth he left when he went to sleep. The transition back to his original body, he says, is a brief blur before he's conscious in his real body with full memories. This clarity, he insists, is one of the worst aspects.
So, what about hard evidence? If this technology exists, surely there would be some undeniable proof. Or does the nature of this subculture prevent that?
Marshall concedes that currently the evidence is circumstantial. He explains that the Illuminati possesses immense technological advantages, far beyond what the public knows, which allows them to operate undetected. Their advanced science, much of it developed by Russian and Chinese inventors, helps them cover their tracks. He believes the greatest fear of the Illuminati is the public finding out about REM-driven cloning and demanding polygraph tests. He states he is willing to undergo one and believes his mother and stepfather, who also allegedly attend the centers, would confess the truth under such a test.
He even claims figures like Ron Paul and Hillary Clinton attend these centers and that the election system is fraudulent. It's a sweeping indictment of global power structures. He also talks about misinformation like the concept of gray aliens and reptilian hybrids, which he dismisses as Illuminati distractions.
Exactly. He states there are no demon reptilians or hybrid demon Illuminati human members. He argues the Illuminati themselves propagate these myths to mislead the public away from the real issue, which he firmly believes is human cloning and REM-driven cloning. He claims the Illuminati are cowardly, nerdy perverts who use technological advantages to mess with people. He also details how seemingly mundane events, like an elderly woman breaching security at a royal event or Michael Fagan breaking into Buckingham Palace, were allegedly staged by the Illuminati to justify increased government security.
He sounds desperate for people to believe him, suggesting that skepticism is cognitive dissonance. What does he want people to do with this information?
His primary mission is to fully expose the Illuminati and shut down these cloning centers. He urges people to blast through their cognitive dissonances, read, print, and share his disclosures like wildfire. He believes that widespread public awareness and demands for polygraph tests are the only way to dismantle this subculture and save not only himself but countless others he claims are unwillingly activated as REM-driven clones.
Donald Marshall's account of REM-driven cloning and the Illuminati is certainly a challenging narrative, pushing the boundaries of belief with its claims of advanced hidden technology and pervasive global malevolence. It compels a stark look at the power of information and the nature of hidden truths.
It leaves us contemplating the sheer scale of the allegations and Marshall's urgent plea for humanity to confront what he describes as its greatest enemy. He truly believes the fate of humanity depends on understanding and acting upon this information.
Welcome to an extraordinary look into a world often whispered about in hushed tones, but rarely brought into the open. Today we're diving into the claims of Donald Marshall, an individual who asserts he's a first-hand witness to a hidden human cloning subculture orchestrated by the Illuminati. Our source material comes directly from his work, Exposing the Illuminati's REM-Driven Human Cloning Subculture, Volume 2. May 18, 2012 to May 24, 2012, Frequently Asked Questions, published in October of 2016. Eloise, this document lays out some truly startling allegations. Where do we even begin to unpack Marshall's assertions?
It's certainly a dense and provocative text, Noah. Marshall's central claim is that the Illuminati, a clandestine global elite, has perfected a technology known as REM-driven human cloning. This isn't just about traditional cloning. It involves a person's consciousness being transferred to a clone body during their rapid eye movement sleep. He states that this technology has been in operation since shortly after World War II, specifically around 1944 or 1945. It's an incredibly bold historical claim, pushing the timeline of advanced cloning far beyond what mainstream science acknowledges.
That's a significant detail. So it's not just about creating a physical copy, but literally inhabiting it. Marshall is saying people go to sleep in their beds and then their consciousness wakes up in a clone body, experiencing the world from that clone's perspective. It sounds like science fiction. What evidence does he offer for this mind-boggling process?
He explains it as a state where your consciousness temporarily inhabits the REM-driven clone, making the experience feel as real as waking life. You're simultaneously asleep in your original body and awake in a clone body on the same Earth. He asserts the primary evidence he can provide is his own first-hand experience and the consistent narrative he presents. He notes that obtaining hard evidence like video footage is impossible because he's only ever there as a clone, and the Illuminati would never allow him to film. Instead, he points to circumstantial evidence found in pop culture, media, and other sources that hint at these hidden technologies.
If the experience is so clear, like waking life, what does he say about the impact on the original body? Does the body back in bed register the experiences of the clone? And what are the different types of clones he describes within this subculture?
Yes, absolutely. Marshall insists that the pain suffered as a REM-driven clone is registered by the original body because, quote, consciousness is linked, end quote. He states that prolonged torture of a clone can lead to heart damage or aneurysms in the original body. As for clone types, he describes several. Duplication clones, like the REM-driven ones he experiences, reanimated clones, which are clones of deceased individuals, and replication clones, which start life as a baby and age naturally. He differentiates between reanimated clones with and without a soulstone microchip implant. Without the chip, they develop their own distinct personality, but are generally dumber. With the chip, they recall the original person's life, but tend to be more impulsive and negative, even prone to criminal behavior like rape and pedophilia, which he attributes to a flawed recording of consciousness. He even refers to them as dead chipheads.
That's disturbing, the idea of flawed consciousness leading to inherent evil. And the concept of a soulstone microchip is particularly chilling. It raises immense ethical questions, even if we were to entertain the scientific possibility. What does Marshall say about the viability of these clones, especially for medical purposes, like organ transplants?
He states that organs from Mark I through Mark IV duplicate clones are not viable for transplantation into an original human's body. Their cells are too different, grown too quickly, and would be rejected. The only viable option for transplant, he claims, comes from replication clones, which are grown from babies. However, this is a slow process, taking many years for the organs to mature. He highlights the profound ethical and moral issues surrounding harvesting organs from replicated clones, as they develop their own minds and personalities over time. Marshall also adds that the Illuminati harvest organs from natural-born humans, including patients in psychiatric hospitals and prisoners, which he refers to as Phase 2 information in his disclosures.
So, if these clones degrade quickly and organs aren't easily interchangeable, what's the purpose of Mark III and Mark IV clones, which he calls independent clones that presidents supposedly use? And how are people, especially celebrities, drawn into this REM-driven cloning subculture?
Marshall claims that Mark III and Mark IV independent clones are also grown quickly through duplication cloning, but they degrade fast, lasting only 6 months to a year. This means powerful figures constantly need new ones. These clones are always similar, but never exactly identical to the original. He notes that a sign of degradation is one eye protruding further than the other. As for recruitment, some are born into it if their parents are involved, becoming loyal agents. Others, random civilians with exceptional talents like singing or rapping, are targeted. After a blood sample is taken to grow a duplicate clone, their consciousness is transferred during REM sleep. They are then shown videos of Illuminati murders, and if they comply, are introduced to a clone of Marshall himself and forced to hurt him until he sings. There's also the element of sex slavery, where attractive individuals are offered fame and money in exchange for being REM-driven clone sex slaves for powerful, often ugly, fat, smelly, and rich figures. If they try to leave, they're threatened with death, like what he claims happened to Bernie Mac.
That paints an incredibly sinister picture. He's alleging a systematic program of coercion, exploitation, and even murder through cloning technology. What about celebrities using clones publicly? Is it always for sinister reasons, or are there other motivations?
Marshall details several reasons why celebrities might appear in public as clones. Sometimes it's for mundane reasons, like the original body having pimples or a cold sore, so they present a best face. He recounts an anecdote about Nicki Minaj almost performing as a clone due to a cold sore, but instead took his clone self's advice to wear a bandana. Other times it's for safety, to avoid dangerous stalkers. Most unsettling, he claims that sometimes the original celebrity is dead and now lives on through cloning technology. The public isn't informed of their death. Instead, multiple duplicate clones are grown to continue profiting from their image. He stresses that these duplicate clones are, quote, dumber than the original and also degrade quickly, requiring constant replacement.
That's a grim fate for public figures, living on as a dumber clone for profit. Marshall also mentions something called megadeath. What exactly does that entail, and why is he so concerned about it?
Megadeath, spelled with an A, is a fate Marshall describes as worse than physical death. It's where, after a person's original body dies, the Illuminati clone the deceased from their remains and transfer their consciousness into new cloned bodies. These cloned bodies are then subjected to torture and death hundreds to thousands of times. He has witnessed this happening to others, including public figures. He's frantic about escaping this fate for himself, which he sees as his core motivation for exposing the Illuminati. He believes his disclosures, even if they lead to his physical death, would hasten the end of their subculture, thereby preventing his own megadeath.
So his mission is driven by a deep fear of this perpetual torture beyond death. Given the gravity of these claims, Marshall must face immense skepticism. How does he address the lack of, quote, hard evidence like video footage of these cloning centers?
He acknowledges the skepticism directly. Marshall states that he has never visited a cloning center in his original body, so he can't film it. He also claims the Illuminati monitor him closely and would never allow his clone to record footage. Instead, he urges people to educate themselves on the science of cloning, consciousness, and sleep stages, and to notice the circumstantial evidence present in culture, movies, songs, and media references. He points to shows like I Cloned My Pet and movies like Avatar and Eyes Wide Shut as Illuminati-made disclosures, sugar-coated versions of reality. He believes that once people's reticular activation systems are attuned to the truth, they will see these subtle hints everywhere.
That's an interesting psychological angle to explain why people don't see it immediately. He's essentially saying that the truth is hidden in plain sight and our conditioning prevents us from recognizing it. He refers to this conditioning and personal biases as factors stifling acceptance of human cloning as reality. He also discusses a technological gap, claiming the public is thousands of years behind the military and Illuminati in terms of technological advancement. How does he tie this all together into his overall strategy for exposure?
He explains that topics like consciousness transfer and human cloning seem like science fiction because the public is so far behind technologically. He cites Phil Schneider's claim that military technology advances 44 years for every 1 calendar year. For Marshall, this technological gap makes the reality of REM-driven cloning entirely plausible. His strategy, or his mission, unfolds in phases. Phase 1 involves gathering as many eyes and ears as possible, raising public awareness to a critical mass. He believes this collective knowledge will create an angry populace demanding answers and lead to the shutdown of cloning centers and the end of human cloning itself. He mentions that the Illuminati, as clone versions of themselves, have even shown him computer-generated probable scenarios of widespread panic, riots, and military uprisings if his disclosures are not handled carefully, implying they want him to sugarcoat the truth to avoid chaos. He refuses to do so entirely, but he is proceeding in phases to mitigate potential catastrophic outcomes.
It sounds like he feels immense pressure, not just from the Illuminati, but from the potential societal fallout of his revelations. What role do specific public figures play in his narrative, and what does he claim about their involvement?
He names many high-profile figures. For example, he claims Queen Elizabeth II owns the primary cloning center in Western Canada and actively participates in torturing clones. He mentions former Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper as someone who knows the exact location of this center. He alleges that figures like Richard Branson, Oprah Winfrey, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu all attend the cloning centers as REM-driven clones. He even claims to have written all the hit songs for artists like Kanye West, Chris Brown, Lady Gaga, Paramore, Cher, and Adele while in a clone body, and that Justin Bieber, also a clone participant, once tried to harm Marshall before backing down. He also discusses how organizations like Godlike Productions and even search engines like Google supposedly suppress information related to his disclosures. The names are numerous and the accusations are severe.
So his mission isn't just about revealing a technology, but exposing a vast conspiracy of powerful individuals. He states he knows his claims are true from first-hand witness accounts through consciousness transfer, rather than guessing or speculating. He also mentioned undergoing MK-Ultra simulations. How does that fit into his claims?
Marshall describes being put through MK-Ultra scenarios as a REM-driven clone, where computer-generated virtual reality simulations felt as real as real. The Illuminati did this to predict his actions once their subculture was fully exposed. In these simulations, he repeatedly committed suicide with a shotgun, which the Illuminati clone versions attributed to his inability to cope with the flashback memories of the evil he witnessed as a clone. He believes this means he faces severe psychological torment once the truth comes out. Despite these personal challenges and the terrifying revelations, his resolve to expose the Illuminati remains central, pushing for an end to what he calls a deplorable injustice.
Donald Marshall's account, as laid out in Exposing the Illuminati's REM-Driven Human Cloning Subculture Volume 2, presents a chilling and complex narrative of a hidden world, advanced technology, and widespread abuses. It forces us to consider the limits of what we know and what we might be conditioned to ignore. Share this episode with someone who is ready to explore uncomfortable truths.
Welcome to an episode that delves into some truly extraordinary claims. Today we're exploring Donald Marshall's self-published document, Public Figures and Their Relationship with Donald Marshall, REM-Driven Clones, Volume 1. This document presents an elaborate narrative involving advanced technology and a secret society. Eloise, to start, who is Donald Marshall and what's the central assertion of this document?
Donald Marshall claims to be a victim of a highly advanced hidden technology used by what he calls the Illuminati. He alleges that when people, including himself and numerous public figures, enter REM sleep, their consciousness is transferred to a duplicate clone body at secret cloning centers. His document is essentially a list of public figures he's encountered in these centers as a REM-driven clone, along with detailed accounts of their alleged actions.
That's a lot to unpack. The document makes a very serious claim right away, suggesting that the silence of these public figures about Marshall's declarations essentially admits their guilt. How does Marshall support this idea legally?
Marshall argues that his declarations against these high-profile figures are so serious and reputation-damaging that under UK law, they constitute slander, false allegations, or inappropriate use of image. He cites specific acts like the Public Interest Disclosure Act 1998, the Enterprise and Regulatory Reform Act 2013, and the Serious Crime Act 2015. His core argument is that if these claims were false, the mentioned individuals would have publicly denied them, provided counter-evidence like lie detector or DNA tests, or taken him to court. Since none of this has happened, in their silence, he says, the public figures admit their guilt.
So the absence of a denial is presented as evidence of truth. It's a provocative legal angle. Let's dig into the core concept of this cloning. What exactly is a REM-driven clone, and how consciousness transfer works according to Marshall?
REM-driven cloning is described as a process where a person goes to sleep in their original body, and 90 to 110 minutes later, their consciousness is transferred to a duplicate clone body. They then wake up in this clone at a remote cloning center and experience the same Earth clear as daylight. These clones are memory suppressed, meaning they don't recall these experiences in their original waking lives, or at least that was the case for Marshall for many years. He emphasizes it is a transfer of consciousness, not the soul, and that the original person's body is merely asleep while the clone is active.
And he says this experience is not like a dream at all, but a real tangible experience. How does he then explain the technological capabilities for this, especially given that many people would find this hard to believe?
He addresses this directly, stating that most people struggle to accept the reality of human cloning for three main reasons. First, our current environment doesn't overtly reveal it, but subtly hints at it if one's reticular activation system is primed to notice. Second, he argues the public is thousands of years behind in technological advancements compared to what the military and Illuminati possess. He cites whistleblowers like Phil Schneider, who claimed military technology advances 44 years for every public year. This rapid advancement, he says, makes consciousness transfer and cloning entirely possible and long established since the 1940s.
That 44-to-1 ratio is certainly a staggering claim, aiming to bridge the gap between perceived reality and the secret technologies. What's the third factor he mentions for public disbelief?
The third factor is personal biases. He says the idea of human cloning removes the uniqueness of the human experience for some, causing discomfort, fear, or anger. Marshall urges people to set aside these biases and review the information objectively, distinguishing between the messenger and those committing the alleged actions.
So it's a request for an open mind in the face of truly unsettling information. Let's talk about some of these public figures. The document claims many celebrities and politicians are involved, often unwillingly. How does Marshall illustrate this with specific examples?
He provides many. Take Adele, for instance. Marshall claims he, as a REM-driven clone, freestyled the song Someone Like You at the cloning center, expressing his sadness over betrayal, and Adele later performed it. For Britney Spears, he connects her notorious head-shaving incident to her witnessing Robert Pickton murder videos as a clone, which drove her to her limit. He even points to her music videos like Break the Ice and Mona Lisa as containing veiled references to cloning, such as a cartoon Britney growing in a cloning tube, or her changing lyrics to She's Been Cloned. Furthermore, he states that he witnessed celebrity clone bodies being disposed of, sometimes through burning or shredding.
That's an attempt to tie real-world events and creative works to the cloning subculture. What about figures in power, like politicians? How were they depicted?
Angela Merkel is mentioned as attending the cloning center, even trying to persuade Marshall to join the Illuminati. He claims to have rejected her, calling the center the Diddle Dome for fat, smelly, ugly, old, and scummy people. More disturbingly, he details Obama's involvement, stating Obama is controlled by primeval Illuminati members like Queen Elizabeth II and Vladimir Putin. Marshall says Obama, as a clone, once instigated a low-level Air Force One flyover in New York City after 9/11 simply to terrify people, then listened and laughed hysterically at the frantic emergency calls. He claims Obama even cried at the cloning center due to his lack of real authority. Marshall also recounts seeing a clone of former U.S. President Bill Clinton confessing to Marshall that he hated his job and wished he could quit.
The idea that a U.S. president could be so controlled and complicit in such a cruel act is a profound accusation. It seems to strip away any notion of free will or public service from these figures. Are there examples of outright violence or murder described at these centers?
Absolutely. Marshall's accounts are filled with them. He claims actor Bernie Mac was murdered by Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, who tortured multiple Bernie Mac clones for hours until he died in his real body from pneumonia because Bernie Mac had stood up against the torture. George Lucas, the filmmaker, is accused of ordering Illuminati clones to light Marshall on fire during the filming of Star Wars Episode 3 so Hayden Christensen could scream realistically for his role. Actress Mila Kunis allegedly stabbed Marshall multiple times and later beat him to death in his clone body multiple times over a perceived insult.
These are truly graphic and disturbing scenarios. What about figures who are already deceased in our known reality? How does Marshall's narrative account for them?
He makes extraordinary claims. Princess Diana, for example, is said to have attended the cloning centers as a REM-driven clone for many years, even participating in some of the evil deeds. Marshall claims she was later murdered by Prince Charles and Queen Elizabeth II because she intended to marry an Arab, Dodi Fayed, and was about to speak publicly about the cloning subculture. Similarly, Muammar Gaddafi is declared not dead, but rather a clone of him was killed while the original Gaddafi is still alive in Gaza. Marshall claims to have interacted with the Gaddafi's clone, even detailing how Gaddafi allegedly negotiated the release of a friend from cloning center imprisonment in exchange for not revealing the cloning subculture to the world after threatening more bombings like Lockerbie.
So even major world events are reinterpreted through the lens of this cloning subculture. What about musical artists whose songs are tied to Marshall's experiences?
Many are cited. Kenny Rogers' song Lady is claimed to be the first song Marshall sang as a child REM-driven clone to Queen Elizabeth II. Kanye West's Heartless is said to be about Marshall's time at the cloning center and his loss of consciousness to Queen Elizabeth II, who owns the Canadian Cloning Center. Nelly Furtado's Say It Right is said to contain the hidden message, Space is cloning. He even claims to have composed all of Maroon 5 and Nickelback songs, and that Nickelback's This Means War was a direct message from the Illuminati about his disclosures. He also states that the song Oops, I Did It Again by Britney Spears directly references him being cloned.
It seems no one is untouched by these claims. The royal family appears to be at the very top of this alleged hierarchy. What does Marshall say about Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip?
Marshall identifies Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip as prime evil Illuminati members and ringleaders of the entire operation. Queen Elizabeth II is said to own the main above-ground cloning center in Canada. She is described as an unbelievable depraved pervert who tortures child clones, uses MK-Ultra mind control on him, turns his family against him, and has ordered the murders of Bernie Mac, Princess Diana, Indigenous Canadian children, and was an accomplice in the Robert Pickton murders. She allegedly holds people's children hostage as clones to ensure silence. He describes her frequently torturing him as a clone, biting his face and crushing his testicles to feed her desire for attention and power.
These are truly monstrous accusations against highly respected global figures. Given the gravity of these claims, what is Marshall's ultimate goal in revealing all of this?
His primary goal is to expose the Illuminati's REM-driven human cloning subculture and shut down the cloning centers. He believes the Illuminati's greatest fear is public awareness. He is asking for 1 million active and brave people to understand his dilemma, subscribe to his Facebook,
protest, and demand polygraph tests from Illuminati members. He states that public figures cannot openly discuss this due to fear of torture and death for their original bodies, so they hint. It is, he says, a world emergency that depends on ordinary people sharing this information widely. He specifically requests people to go to his Facebook page and share the documents.
The document ends with a powerful plea, asking readers to overcome their initial discomfort and actively participate in sharing this information. It's a call to arms against a perceived global conspiracy. Thank you, Eloise, for walking us through these truly unbelievable claims from Donald Marshall's public figures and their relationship with Donald Marshall as REM-driven clones, Volume 1.
My pleasure, Noah.
If this episode intrigued you, consider sharing it with someone who appreciates exploring controversial narratives.
Welcome to an episode that delves into some truly extraordinary claims. Today we're exploring Donald Marshall's self-published document, Public Figures and Their Relationship with Donald Marshall, REM-Driven Clones, Volume 1. This document presents an elaborate narrative involving advanced technology and a secret society. Eloise, to start, who is Donald Marshall and what's the central assertion of this document?
Donald Marshall claims to be a victim of a highly advanced hidden technology used by what he calls the Illuminati. He alleges that when people, including himself and numerous public figures, enter REM sleep, their consciousness is transferred to a duplicate clone body at secret cloning centers. His document is essentially a list of public figures he's encountered in these centers as a REM-driven clone, along with detailed accounts of their alleged actions.
That's a lot to unpack. The document makes a very serious claim right away, suggesting that the silence of these public figures about Marshall's declarations essentially admits their guilt. How does Marshall support this idea legally?
Marshall argues that his declarations against these high-profile figures are so serious and reputation-damaging that under UK law, they constitute slander, false allegations, or inappropriate use of image. He cites specific acts like the Public Interest Disclosure Act 1998, the Enterprise and Regulatory Reform Act 2013, and the Serious Crime Act 2015. His core argument is that if these claims were false, the mentioned individuals would have publicly denied them, provided counter-evidence like lie detector or DNA tests, or taken him to court. Since none of this has happened, in their silence, he says, the public figures admit their guilt.
So the absence of a denial is presented as evidence of truth. It's a provocative legal angle. Let's dig into the core concept of this cloning. What exactly is a REM-driven clone and how consciousness transfer works according to Marshall?
REM-driven cloning is described as a process where a person goes to sleep in their original body, and 90 to 110 minutes later, their consciousness is transferred to a duplicate clone body. They then wake up in this clone at a remote cloning center and experience the same Earth clear as daylight. These clones are memory suppressed, meaning they don't recall these experiences in their original waking lives, or at least that was the case for Marshall for many years. He emphasizes it is a transfer of consciousness, not the soul, and that the original person's body is merely asleep while the clone is active.
And he says this experience is not like a dream at all, but a real tangible experience. How does he then explain the technological capabilities for this, especially given that many people would find this hard to believe?
He addresses this directly, stating that most people struggle to accept the reality of human cloning for three main reasons. First, our current environment doesn't overtly reveal it, but subtly hints at it if one's reticular activation system is primed to notice. Second, he argues the public is thousands of years behind in technological advancements compared to what the military and Illuminati possess. He cites whistleblowers like Phil Schneider, who claimed military technology advances 44 years for every public year. This rapid advancement, he says, makes consciousness transfer and cloning entirely possible and long established since the 1940s.
That 44-to-1 ratio is certainly a staggering claim, aiming to bridge the gap between perceived reality and the secret technologies. What's the third factor he mentions for public disbelief?
The third factor is personal biases. He says the idea of human cloning removes the uniqueness of the human experience for some, causing discomfort, fear, or anger. Marshall urges people to set aside these biases and review the information objectively, distinguishing between the messenger and those committing the alleged actions.
So it's a request for an open mind in the face of truly unsettling information. Let's talk about some of these public figures. The document claims many celebrities and politicians are involved, often unwillingly. How does Marshall illustrate this with specific examples?
He provides many. Take Adele, for instance. Marshall claims he, as a REM-driven clone, freestyled the song Someone Like You at the cloning center, expressing his sadness over betrayal, and Adele later performed it. For Britney Spears, he connects her notorious head-shaving incident to her witnessing Robert Pickton murder videos as a clone, which drove her to her limit. He even points to her music videos like Break the Ice and Mona Lisa as containing veiled references to cloning, such as a cartoon Britney growing in a cloning tube, or her changing lyrics to She's Been Cloned. Furthermore, he states that he witnessed celebrity clone bodies being disposed of, sometimes through burning or shredding.
That's an attempt to tie real-world events and creative works to the cloning subculture. What about figures in power, like politicians? How were they depicted?
Angela Merkel is mentioned as attending the cloning center, even trying to persuade Marshall to join the Illuminati. He claims to have rejected her, calling the center the Diddle Dome, for fat, smelly, ugly, old, and scummy people. More disturbingly, he details Obama's involvement, stating Obama is controlled by primeval Illuminati members like Queen Elizabeth II and Vladimir Putin. Marshall says Obama, as a clone, once instigated a low-level Air Force One flyover in New York City after 9/11 simply to terrify people, then listened and laughed hysterically at the frantic emergency calls. He claims Obama even cried at the cloning center due to his lack of real authority. Marshall also recounts seeing a clone of former U.S. President Bill Clinton confessing to Marshall that he hated his job and wished he could quit.
The idea that a U.S. president could be so controlled and complicit in such a cruel act is a profound accusation. It seems to strip away any notion of free will or public service from these figures. Are there examples of outright violence or murder described at these centers?
Absolutely. Marshall's accounts are filled with them. He claims actor Bernie Mac was murdered by Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, who tortured multiple Bernie Mac clones for hours until he died in his real body from pneumonia because Bernie Mac had stood up against the torture. George Lucas, the filmmaker, is accused of ordering Illuminati clones to light Marshall on fire during the filming of Star Wars Episode 3 so Hayden Christensen could scream realistically for his role. Actress Mila Kunis allegedly stabbed Marshall multiple times and later beat him to death in his clone body multiple times over a perceived insult.
These are truly graphic and disturbing scenarios.
What about figures who are already deceased in our known reality? How does Marshall's narrative account for them?
He makes extraordinary claims. Princess Diana, for example, is said to have attended the cloning centers as a REM-driven clone for many years, even participating in some of the evil deeds. Marshall claims she was later murdered by Prince Charles and Queen Elizabeth II because she intended to marry an Arab, Dodi Fayed, and was about to speak publicly about the cloning subculture. Similarly, Muammar Gaddafi is declared not dead, but rather a clone of him was killed while the original Gaddafi is still alive in Gaza. Marshall claims to have interacted with the Gaddafi's clone, even detailing how Gaddafi allegedly negotiated the release of a friend from cloning center imprisonment in exchange for not revealing the cloning subculture to the world after threatening more bombings like Lockerbie.
So even major world events are reinterpreted through the lens of this cloning subculture. What about musical artists whose songs are tied to Marshall's experiences?
Many are cited. Kenny Rogers' song Lady is claimed to be the first song Marshall sang as a child, REM-driven clone to Queen Elizabeth II. Kanye West's Heartless is said to be about Marshall's time at the cloning center and his loss of consciousness to Queen Elizabeth II, who owns the Canadian Cloning Center. Nelly Furtado's Say It Right is said to contain the hidden message, Space is cloning. He even claims to have composed all of Maroon 5 and Nickelback songs, and that Nickelback's This Means War was a direct message from the Illuminati about his disclosures. He also states that the song Oops, I Did It Again by Britney Spears directly references him being cloned.
It seems no one is untouched by these claims. The royal family appears to be at the very top of this alleged hierarchy. What does Marshall say about Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip?
Marshall identifies Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip as prime evil Illuminati members and ringleaders of the entire operation. Queen Elizabeth II is said to own the main above-ground cloning center in Canada. She is described as an unbelievable depraved pervert who tortures child clones, uses MK-Ultra mind control on him, turns his family against him, and has ordered the murders of Bernie Mac, Princess Diana, Indigenous Canadian children, and was an accomplice in the Robert Pickton murders. She allegedly holds people's children hostage as clones to ensure silence. He describes her frequently torturing him as a clone, biting his face and crushing his testicles to feed her desire for attention and power.
These are truly monstrous accusations against highly respected global figures. Given the gravity of these claims, what is Marshall's ultimate goal in revealing all of this?
His primary goal is to expose the Illuminati's REM-driven human cloning subculture and shut down the cloning centers. He believes the Illuminati's greatest fear is public awareness. He is asking for 1 million active and brave people to understand his dilemma, subscribe to his Facebook, protest, and demand polygraph tests from Illuminati members. He states that public figures cannot openly discuss this due to fear of torture and death for their original bodies, so they hint. It is, he says, a world emergency that depends on ordinary people sharing this information widely. He specifically requests people to go to his Facebook page and share the documents.
The document ends with a powerful plea, asking readers to overcome their initial discomfort and actively participate in sharing this information. It's a call to arms against a perceived global conspiracy. Thank you, Eloise, for walking us through these truly unbelievable claims from Donald Marshall's public figures and their relationship with Donald Marshall as REM-driven clones, Volume 1.
My pleasure, Noah.
If this episode intrigued you, consider sharing it with someone who appreciates exploring controversial narratives.
Welcome. Today, we're diving into a deeply unsettling account from Donald Marshall, a man who claims to be an unwilling participant in what he calls the Illuminati's REM-driven cloning subculture. Our discussion focuses on his experiences detailed in the document, Experiences from the Cloning Center, Volume 1, April 5th, 2012 to May 24th, 2012, published in October 2016.
That's right, Noah. Marshall's document isn't a technical guide, but a first-hand narrative of his torment. He asserts that whenever he enters REM sleep, his consciousness is unwillingly transferred from his original body to a clone located at a cloning center, primarily in Canada. The core distinction he emphasizes is that individuals meet and interact as REM-driven cloned versions of themselves, not in their physical bodies. This, he argues, reveals a world operating under complete secrecy, where public figures believe they're untouchable.
It's a staggering claim, suggesting a parallel reality. What did Marshall describe in those initial days? What kind of experiences was he having at these so-called cloning centers beginning in April 2012?
Marshall immediately reported a, quote, menagerie of torture, end quote. He described being subjected to various forms of abuse, from being punched and kicked by other REM-driven clones to having arrows shot at him. What's even more disturbing is his claim that this torture extended beyond the cloning center. On April 5, 2012, he stated that these clone experiences caused physical repercussions in his original body, giving him, quote, warning signs for a stroke and, quote, low blood sugar feeling attacks during his waking hours. He was only 36 at the time, and his health was deteriorating because of it.
So the trauma was not confined to the clone body, it was bleeding into his real life. Given this intense experience, how did the alleged Illuminati members try to manage him? Did they attempt to silence him or perhaps entice him in any way?
They certainly did. On April 12th, the actress Kristen Bell, as a REM-driven clone, reportedly tried to entice Marshall to willingly join the Illuminati and create songs for them from the cloning center. Marshall refused, and she apparently screamed at him. Later on April 14th, Queen Elizabeth II, also as a REM-driven clone, allegedly made fake promises to cease the cloning if Marshall stopped his disclosures, but he stated she had lied many times before. The Illuminati were clearly worried, repeatedly asking him to delete his accounts and stop talking.
It sounds like they were testing his resolve, alternating between torture, bribery, and threats. But Marshall continued to resist. What happened when they escalated the physical torment, particularly on April 25th?
That was a particularly brutal night. Marshall claimed he died 3 times as a REM-driven clone. He described Queen Elizabeth II as a clone, biting his cheek and crushing his testicles. Afterward, Phil Reese, identified as a doorman for the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, allegedly entered and smashed Marshall's clone with a bat, causing his consciousness to fade to black. He was then reactivated in 2 more clone bodies, each time subjected to further beatings by his stepfamily and actress Mila Kunis until he died again. He reported feeling the physical effects in his original body, particularly a weakened heart.
This paints an incredibly grim picture of repeated extreme violence. Yet, despite this, Marshall's disclosures were having an impact. Did the Illuminati's tactics shift again as his information spread?
They did. By May 1st, Marshall reported the Illuminati REM clones were begging him to, quote, sugarcoat events at the cloning center, to omit details and exclude names because they feared public outrage and even their own deaths. Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, allegedly made similar pleas on May 14th, saying Marshall needed to, quote, sugarcoat the details or the world would end, end quote. Marshall consistently refused, always stating he would tell the truth. His refusal to be silenced was causing real desperation among his captors.
So instead of constant torture, they were trying to negotiate and manipulate his narrative. What about other prominent global figures? Did they also interact with him in these cloned environments?
Yes, on May 2nd, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, as a REM clone, allegedly tried to convince him to stay in the subculture, offering promises of no more torture and, quote, clone sex with celebrities. Marshall says he insulted her, leading to her crying. Then, Vladimir Putin, also as a REM clone, intervened expressing support for Merkel and then stabbing Marshall's clone 3 times, twisting the knife, and threatening him to stop his disclosures. Marshall retorted by calling Putin names and mocking his condition and credentials. A few days later, on May 15th, Queen Elizabeth II, as a clone, reportedly paralyzed and repeatedly stabbed Marshall's clone for many hours, avoiding vital areas to prolong the pain.
The sheer audacity of these claims is something to grapple with. But if his disclosures were having such an effect, were there signs that people were actually leaving this alleged cloning subculture, or that Marshall was getting some reprieve?
He stated there was. On May 3rd and 4th, he wasn't activated as a REM-driven clone for 2 nights in a row, a rare occurrence he attributed to public awareness. By May 12th, he announced good news, saying many REM-driven clones were dropping out of the REM-driven cloning subculture. He even named Beyoncé, Jay-Z, and Kanye West, claiming they wanted to leave and would no longer torture him for songs. He interpreted this as, quote, rats jumping a sinking ship, end quote, believing the Illuminati's time was quickly running out and they feared public lynching.
This introduces an element of external validation, or at least Marshall's interpretation of it. Were there any specific incidents or explanations he provided that shed light on why certain public events might be connected to this cloning phenomenon?
Indeed. On May 18th, Marshall explained the Chris Brown and Rihanna fistfight. He claimed he witnessed it as a REM clone. He said Rihanna, while in a trance-like state, repeatedly stabbed Chris Brown's clone with a knife, believing it was just clone pain. When Brown's clone was in severe pain, he retaliated in real life by biting Rihanna. Marshall cited court documents as proof of Brown's recorded, quote, "You just did the stupidest ever, now I'm really gonna kill you." Also, on May 21st, he discussed Gabriela Rico Jimenez's reported REM-driven clone experience, clarifying that her described horrors happened in a clone body, not her original real-life body, emphasizing the clarity of these clone experiences versus dreams.
So he's offering these detailed explanations for real-world events. Finally, as his narrative progresses, does Marshall also address the issue of loyalty or potential betrayals within the conspiracy, or how disinformation might be spread?
He does. On May 24th, Marshall revealed that 2 conspiracy theorists, Lenny Bloom and Jane Steele, whom he had initially contacted for help, betrayed him. He claims they were secretly attending the cloning centers as deformed REM clones and eventually joined the Illuminati in exchange for fame, leading to a lavish radio show. He vividly recounted their apologies and his emotional response, referencing Adele's song Someone Like You. He also named Michael Moore as a disinformation agent for the Illuminati, claiming Moore knew the real truth about 9/11 and deliberately lied to the public.
Donald Marshall's account presents an extraordinary narrative of high-stakes deception, torture, and global manipulation, all centered on this concept of REM-driven cloning. His detailed timeline of interactions and evolving strategies from the alleged Illuminati, along with his steadfast refusal to be silenced, forms a compelling and disturbing testimony that demands attention and consideration.
It truly offers a unique lens through which to view not only his alleged experiences, but also the broader implications of hidden technologies and power structures. His persistent call for public awareness underscores the gravity of his claims.
If you found this discussion thought-provoking, share this episode with someone who would appreciate hearing.
Welcome to an episode where we delve into a truly extraordinary and unsettling world, one unveiled by author Donald Marshall in his work, quote, The Vril, Full Disclosure Part 1. This document claims to pull back the curtain on a hidden reality, asserting that we live alongside an ancient, dangerous species known as the Vril reptiles. Eloise, this sounds like something ripped from a science fiction novel, yet Marshall presents it as a crucial revelation. What exactly is the premise of this groundbreaking disclosure?
It absolutely challenges our conventional understanding of reality, Noah. According to Marshall, we share our planet with the Vril, subterranean beings divided into 3 distinct races: Vril Type 1s, Vril Type 2s, and Vril Type 3s. The core threat, as he describes it, comes from the Vril Type 1s, which are capable of a chilling parasitic takeover of the human brain. This process, Marshall claims, transforms a person into a mere host for the Vril's consciousness. He states this book is a, quote, crucial revelation that contributes to a paradigm shift in human consciousness, end quote, by exposing an underground species that can biologically body snatch human beings.
Body snatching through parasitic takeover. That is quite the claim.
And how does Donald Marshall assert he came by this information? These, quote, crucial revelations, end quote, as you mentioned. Does he present himself as a researcher, a witness, or something else entirely?
Marshall claims direct, first-hand experience, Noah. He states his knowledge of the Illuminati's machinations and the vril comes from, quote, consciousness transfer from my original body to my REM sleep-driven human clone body to the cloning center whenever I reached REM sleep in my original body, end quote. He positions himself as a victim of this, quote, REM-driven human cloning subculture, end quote, which he categorizes as 32nd degree Freemasonry and high-level Scientology knowledge. The real reptile parasites, he says, represent an even higher level, 33rd degree Freemasonry and the highest level Scientology knowledge. He insists that eradicating these real parasites is, quote, absolutely critical to the survival of our species, end quote.
So his claims are rooted in personal experiences within this alleged cloning subculture, which then introduced him to these real parasites. Let's focus on these vril type 1s since they're presented as the primary threat for biological body snatching. What do they look like and what are their defining characteristics according to Marshall?
The vril type 1s are certainly unique visually. Marshall describes them as a much evolved form of lizard species, often referred to as vril lizards. They're small, ranging from 1 foot in adolescence to 2.5 feet in adulthood. They have red or sometimes black diamond-shaped scales covering their bodies, with flesh underneath that is smooth and extremely sensitive, reportedly burning with citrus juice. Their heads resemble a king crab, and their eyes are, quote, mounted on stalks, end quote, giving them eye stalks. Instead of a tongue, they possess a blood spike used to pierce prey.
That's a very vivid description. What about their other capabilities beyond just their appearance? Do they have any unique sensory abilities or behaviors that set them apart?
They do. Vril type 1s have a built-in sonar system, or echolocation, which makes them highly sensitive to light and sound. Marshall explains they can see sound, including music, and use clicking noises to navigate underground. This sensitivity is why they prefer subterranean habitats. Sunlight blinds them, and loud sounds debilitate them. Behaviorally, they're described as, quote, instinctually cowards when alone, preferring to attack in packs. Their saliva is, quote, caustic and extremely nasty, end quote, capable of paralyzing humans completely and causing black and purple veins to appear. Their bite is reportedly necrotic and deadly. They are also hermaphrodites, asexual creatures that lay clutches of 3 eggs at a time, and they communicate in clicks and gurgles. Despite some limited tool use, Marshall characterizes them as, quote, extremely dumb creatures, end quote, compared to humans, with a psychology that is, quote, stupid, erratic, violent, and evil.
This paints a picture of a truly horrific creature. Now, how do these real type 1s, with all their described traits, actually perform this parasitic takeover or droning process that Marshall details?
It's a particularly disturbing process. Each vril type 1 has a proboscis protruding from the top of its head, which actually contains its brain and spinal cord. Marshall claims that once in its lifetime, a vril type 1 can slowly eject this proboscis from its body, a process that kills the vril's reptilian body. The proboscis, now a worm-like quill containing the vril's consciousness, then seeks a host. It enters a human's eye, even if the eyes are closed, spirals around the optical nerve, and navigates through the brain to the claustrum, which Marshall identifies as the, quote, epicenter of consciousness, end quote. It's reportedly drawn there by taste sensations, describing the area as tasting like butterscotch. Once there, the proboscis, quote, secretes parasitical cells, end quote, that dominate the victim's brain cell by cell, effectively extinguishing human consciousness forever. This creates a human host, or drone, completely controlled by the vril type 1 consciousness.
So the original human consciousness is completely gone, and the body is then a vehicle for the vril. What happens to these human hosts after such a traumatic event? How do they function in the world?
Marshall explains that the newly created human host requires about a month of recovery due to severe physical illness and weakness, described as similar to recovering from a major accident. After this, the real consciousness, now controlling the human body, begins to mimic the original human's life, mannerisms, and behaviors. The document states that these hosts, quote, steal the life of the human being, end quote. They parasitized, spending their money, driving their cars, and living their lives. However, these human host bodies eventually degrade, developing rashes, hair loss, and thyroid problems. Psychologically, real human hosts are depicted as having, quote, an extremely warped sense of psychology, end quote, lacking compassion, often bisexual, homosexual, or child molesters, and prone to lying and deceit. Marshall stresses that, quote, human hosts of real type 1 reptile consciousness know they are human hosts, end quote, and remain compliant because their existence depends on mimicking human behavior.
That's a chilling assertion that these hosts walk among us, aware of their altered state. Marshall also mentions, quote, the soul stone microchip, end
The
quote,
Vril.
and
Full
technological
disclosure,
body snatching.
part 2.
Is this related to the Vril, or is it a separate Illuminati operation?
It's both. The Soulstone microchip is presented as a method the Illuminati developed to, quote, cheat death, end quote, by recording a being's entire consciousness, though it's described as a flawed and negative copy. This microchip can be implanted into a human brain, often during surgery, to override the original consciousness, creating a technologically body-snatched individual. Crucially, Marshall claims Vril consciousness can also be recorded onto these microchips. When a Vril consciousness from a microchip takes over a human body, it reportedly behaves, quote, much crazier and more erratic ways than usual compared to biologically droned hosts. So, while a distinct technology, it serves a similar purpose of supplanting human consciousness, and Vril are involved.
So we have two methods of body snatching, biological and technological, both linked to these Vril. You also mentioned Vril type 3s. How do they differ from the type 1s, and what specific threats do they pose?
Vril type 3s are depicted as even more formidable. They are a unisexual race, meaning they have distinct male and female sexes, unlike the asexual type 1s and 2s. They are the biggest, growing over 8 or even 9 feet tall, and are also considered the smartest of the Vril races. Physically, they have long necks, big bulbous eyes, and skin described as sleek, smooth, and rubbery, like a dolphin's, sometimes with tiger stripes. Unlike type 1s, they have tongues instead of blood spikes. Their mouths can open, quote, extremely wide, end quote, allowing them to latch onto a victim's face and, quote, completely suck the air out of the prey's lungs, end quote. Their strengths also include highly developed pineal glands, granting them empathic powers to, quote, blast their desired target with any emotion to the extreme, end quote, like hopelessness or fear, rendering victims unconscious. They have forearm spikes that can inject debilitating drugs, and they are, quote, difficult to beat in hand-to-hand combat, end quote, due to boning plates. They can also hibernate in freezing temperatures for months.
That sounds terrifyingly powerful. What are their weaknesses then, if any? And what about their diet? Do they also consume human beings?
They do have weaknesses, primarily related to their subterranean origins. They cannot stay on the Earth's surface for long due to atmospheric pressure differences and require an oxygen-methane mix to breathe, developing asthma-like symptoms if exposed to surface conditions for too long. Their skulls are described as, quote, not very sturdy, end quote, and can be easily flattened. They're also highly sensitive to sunlight, bright lights, loud sounds, and their skin burns with citrus juice or hot sauce. Their brains are located at the base of their neck and spine, making those vital areas. As for food, Vril type 3s, like type 1s, drink blood, preferring poultry and human blood, especially human brains and pancreases. Marshall recounts an alleged encounter by Tila Tequila, a celebrity who, after discussing clothing centers, was reportedly confronted by a pumpkinhead-like Vril type 3 at a cloning center, screaming at her for exposing them.
So these creatures are deeply intertwined with the Illuminati's alleged agenda. Why then do they remain hidden? Why don't they, quote, come to the surface and make themselves known, end quote, as Marshall poses in his text?
Marshall offers several reasons for their secrecy. Firstly, he says, quote, parasites are cowards and parasite psychology revolves around secrecy, deceptions, and concealing their true identities, end quote. Secondly, it's tied to their history with mankind, where past human civilizations, including the Aztecs and Egyptians, repeatedly beat them back underground when their populations grew too large. This history, coupled with their perceived ugliness, makes secrecy crucial for their survival. But the biggest reason, according to Marshall, is the alliance between the Vril and certain Illuminati bloodlines. These Illuminati bloodlines, he claims, have been exchanging, quote, gold, diamonds, precious gemstones, and other jewels, end quote, from underground Vril in exchange for, quote, human children and adults for the Vril to eat, end quote. This alliance ensures Vril remains secret, preventing exposure of humanity's betrayal.
That's a staggering claim, that world leaders and the Illuminati would conspire to sacrifice humans in exchange for wealth. Does Marshall also claim political figures are involved, perhaps even controlled by this network?
He makes very specific and severe allegations. Marshall claims that Russian and Chinese leadership control U.S. presidents, asserting that both Barack Obama and Donald Trump were, quote, total puppets, end quote, manipulated as REM-driven clones behind the scenes to further the New World Order's goals and America's demise. He ties this to a quote from Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev in 2012 about, quote, how many aliens were among us on Earth, end quote, suggesting Medvedev was alluding to the Vril and their human hosts. Marshall states that these leaderships are complicit in creating Vril human hosts in a military precision fashion, with China creating more than all other nations combined. The Illuminati, he says, use Vril Type 1s for a Luciferian agenda, even releasing human hosts into society just to see what these Vril reptilian parasite human hosts, which now control the entire mechanical functions of a human body, will do.
So this extends to the highest levels of power, all serving this Vril agenda. Given these claims, what methods does Marshall propose for detecting these Vril human hosts among the population, and what is his ultimate call to action regarding the Vril species?
Marshall suggests that Vril human hosts can be detected through medical means, specifically, quote, CT, computed tomography, scans, and MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, end quote, which would reveal damage to the eye where the prospectus entered and to the frontal lobes or other brain areas. Blood tests are also mentioned as a detection method. He insists on, quote, unequivocal and concrete proof, end quote, before any action is taken to prevent false positives. His ultimate call is for global exposure and eradication. He states, quote, kill all the Vril human hosts. Human hosts do not like it that I endorse the extinction of Vrils and human hosts, end quote. He envisions humanity rising up to oust complicit leaders and, quote, eradicate Vril reptiles from this planet, end quote.
And there is one final bizarre connection he makes regarding gold. How does gold factor into this Vril and Illuminati narrative?
Marshall presents this as Phase 4 information, initially deemed too absurd. He claims the Illuminati feed natural gold to Vril Type 1 reptiles because it induces, quote, an extreme state of drug-induced euphoria, worse than heroin, end quote, in the Vril. Illuminati members, he says, experience this exact high by having their consciousness recorded onto microchips and then temporarily attached by a wire to a Vril Type 1's brain as the Vril consumes gold and goat or human blood. This, he states, is why there are gold for dollars and cash for gold adverts, as the Illuminati seeks to acquire natural gold for this purpose. He also warns of a potential staged alien landing by technologically advanced aliens like Amun-Ra and Lucifer, who would demand the world's gold in exchange for solving the Vril reptilian problem. But this would be a deception by the Illuminati to acquire all the gold for themselves.
Donald Marshall's The Vril, Full Disclosure Part 1 presents a truly unsettling vision of hidden threats and global conspiracies. His claims, from subterranean vril reptiles body-snatching humans to world leaders engaging in a Luciferian agenda, demand profound consideration of the nature of reality itself. If you found this discussion thought-provoking, consider sharing this episode with someone who might also find it compelling.
Welcome to an episode that challenges everything we thought we knew about history and the very fabric of our reality. Today, we delve into Donald Marshall's extensive work, which promises to uncover a clandestine relationship between humanity and a parasitic species known as the vril reptiles. Eloise, this sounds like a lot to unpack, but Marshall claims this is a groundbreaking expose. What exactly are these vril reptiles, and what's the central premise he is laying out for us?
Noah, it is indeed a lot, and Marshall frames this as an urgent wake-up call. The core of his revelation is the vril reptiles. He identifies three distinct races: vril type 1, vril type 2, and vril type 3. These are not extraterrestrials in the traditional sense. They are what he calls terrestrial aliens, meaning they originate from deep within the Earth. Marshall states, quote, "Vril reptiles are from deep internal Earth. Vril reptiles are foreign to the surface of the Earth, and vril reptiles can be considered underground aliens or terrestrial aliens because vril reptiles are not native to the Earth's surface," end quote. He claims they evolved from dinosaurs and survived cataclysms by burrowing miles underground.
So, ancient, subterranean, reptilian life forms. That's a bold claim. You mentioned three types. What distinguishes them? Do they all have the same abilities, or is there a hierarchy here?
Absolutely. There's a distinct hierarchy and varying capabilities. Vril type 1s are described as most similar to highly evolved lizards, or saurian, with a king crab-shaped head, diamond scales, and claws. They're parasitic, using a proboscis to body snatch humans, which Marshall refers to as droning. Vril type 2s are similar biologically, but lack the blood dart spike of the type 1s. Then there are the vril type 3s, which are larger, up to 7 feet tall, with long necks, bulbous eyes, and resemble what Marshall calls long-necked gray aliens. These type 3s are empathic, capable of a mind blast that immobilizes prey, and control the other two types of vril. Crucially, all three types can talk, though Marshall notes the type 1s sound like they've swallowed helium.
Talking subterranean reptiles that can mind blast, this certainly paints a vivid picture. Marshall says they've influenced human history since ancient times. What's the earliest example he points to?
He goes right back to Atlantis, approximated around 9600 BC. Marshall states Atlantis is not a myth, offering Adolf Hitler's expedition to Antarctica as proof. He claims Hitler, guided by vril type 1s, rediscovered an abandoned Atlantean underground base there. This base contained blueprints for advanced technology, including flying saucers and potentially even REM sleep-driven human cloning technology. Marshall argues, quote, "The Atlanteans were an advanced race of human civilization and referred to themselves as the Thule Society because the Atlanteans called the continent of Atlantis Thule," end quote. He directly refutes narratives of psychic abilities or alien plans given to Nazis, saying it was purely reverse engineering Atlantean tech.
So Hitler's pursuit of occult power was actually a quest for Atlantean technology facilitated by these vril reptiles. And how did Atlantis itself fall, according to Marshall's narrative?
The destruction of Atlantis is directly linked to the vril. Marshall claims the Atlanteans discovered the vril, and, realizing the parasitic capabilities of the vril type 1s, began using their proboscises to create human hosts of vril consciousness en masse. These hosts were, quote, obedient and loyal slaves. He suggests that corrupt Atlanteans, along with the vril type 3s, attempted to parasitize the entire civilization. To prevent this complete takeover, opposing Atlanteans sacrificed the entire civilization. Cold fusion, a powerful technology allegedly gifted by aliens, is even posited as a possible cause for the cataclysmic event that destroyed Atlantis.
That's a disturbing vision of power and enslavement. So these vril didn't just disappear after Atlantis. How did they reemerge and integrate into subsequent human civilizations like ancient Egypt?
After Atlantis, the Vril retreated underground, waiting for opportunities to infiltrate human populations again. Ancient Egypt, flourishing between 5500 BC and 30 BC, became a droning society. Marshall states that many pharaohs were either Vril human hosts or Vril reptilian enablers, collaborating with the Vril Type 3s, who secretly controlled Egypt from behind the scenes. They conducted assembly line droning in temples, turning slaves into Vril human hosts using the Vril Type 1 proboscises. The Vril Type 3s even wore masks to conceal their appearance, as humans have an instinctual fear of them.
This paints a very different picture of ancient Egypt. What about the famous Egyptian symbols and practices? How does Marshall tie them into this Vril narrative?
This is where it gets particularly chilling. Marshall reinterprets many iconic Egyptian symbols as direct references to Vril reptiles and the droning process. For example, the uraeus, the snake and eagle on pharaohs' headdresses, symbolizes the Vril Type 1 proboscis, the serpent, and the soaring intelligence of the Vril consciousness once it takes over a human body, the eagle. The Eye of Ra and the Eye of Horus, often seen as symbols of protection or royal power, are described as droning symbols. The curly thing or squiggle represents the Vril Type 1 proboscis protruding from the eye, and the line downwards from the tear duct signifies the oozing pus from the parasitization process, which was considered a holy symbol in ancient times. He flatly states, quote, "Both the Eye of Amun-Ra and Eye of Horus symbology should in actuality be viewed as the death of human consciousness," end quote. Even the Ankh, known as the key of life, is reinterpreted as a tool used to carefully remove a victim's eyeball to insert the Vril proboscis, making it a key of death for human consciousness, but a key of life for the Vril parasite.
That's a complete inversion of their traditional meanings, transforming them into symbols of parasitic takeover. Given the sheer number of Vril Type 1s, how did the Egyptians manage such a widespread threat?
He claims the pyramids themselves served as Vril Type 1 traps. These pyramids had angled little vents lined with smooth limestone leading to subterranean chambers with pits full of rubble and Vril Type 1 remains. The ancient Egyptians would trick the stupid Vril Type 1s into entering, promising them access to the pharaoh's body or another dimension. Once inside, the steep, smooth shafts prevented their escape, leading them to their death in the pit. Early archaeologists mistook the Vril scales for snake scales. This systematic culling was a way to manage the rampant Vril population. It was also why cats were worshipped. Marshall claims Vril Type 1s would have sex with cats due to their proportionate size, and parasitized cats became much smarter, earning reverence.
So the pyramids and even cat worship had a direct and rather gruesome connection to managing these Vril creatures. How does this ancient Vril influence extend to modern power structures, like royal families and the Illuminati?
Marshall connects it directly to the 13 Illuminati bloodline families, such as the Rothschilds and Rockefellers. He claims these families are extremely inbred and indoctrinated in Luciferianism, practicing things like cannibalism and human sacrifice. Their immense wealth, he argues, comes from a centuries-old alliance with Vril reptiles. The Vril, being subterranean, provided gold, diamonds, and gemstones from underground in exchange for human flesh to eat and human bodies to body snatch and turn into Vril human hosts. This is the Vril reptilian 13 Illuminati bloodline covenant. He implicates the British monarchy, even suggesting Prince Charles's pride in being descended from Vlad the Impaler is significant, as Vlad was, quote, extremely complicit with Vril, turning his own people into hosts.
That's an extraordinary claim, tying global elite wealth and power directly to a trade with these Vril reptiles. Does Marshall suggest this is still happening today? And what's the personal cost to those involved?
Yes, he claims it is absolutely still happening. He reveals that royalty and celebrities who are part of this Illuminati REM sleep-driven human cloning subculture are essentially trapped. They cannot publicly expose the Vril or the cloning without facing severe consequences, including remote execution of their original bodies or being mega-deathed,
repeatedly killed as clones by vril reptiles and other aliens at cloning centers. This constant threat of torture and death for themselves and their bloodlines forces them into complicity, leading them to hint at these hidden truths indirectly through their work. He mentions Kanye West, Beyoncé, and Oprah as examples of celebrities plagued by this dilemma.
It sounds like a pervasive and terrifying system of control. How does Marshall explain the role of religion in this vril-influenced world?
He asserts that religions were often invented by vril reptiles and vril human hosts as a method of populace control, or they were infiltrated and subtly altered. Religious leaders, past and present, particularly those within the Vatican, are implicated in this agenda. He states that popes, including John Paul II and Benedict XVI, were aware of vril reptiles and the demonic possession being a metaphor for vril parasitical takeover. Pope Francis, for instance, is described as a caretaker figurehead pope controlled by factions like the Russians and Chinese at cloning centers, where he's allegedly involved in horrific acts. Even the design of St. Peter's Square is presented as a deliberate advertisement of the Vatican's alliance with vril reptiles, with its V-shaped walls symbolizing vril.
The idea that sacred institutions are so deeply compromised is truly unsettling. And beyond religion, does Marshall point to other cultural or historical elements that covertly reference these vril reptiles?
He does, even in ancient literature. Marshall analyzes Dante's Infernal, interpreting its 9 circles of hell as a metaphorical journey into internal earth, where vril reptiles reside. Specifically, in the 8th circle, Ditch 7, where thieves undergo horrible metamorphosis inflicted by vengeful reptiles, he sees direct allegories for vril type 1's body-snatching humans. The changing forms of sinners into reptiles are, quote, indirect references about the biological body snatching of human bodies via the vril type 1 proboscis, end quote. He also examines the Voynich manuscript, an undeciphered 15th century book, claiming its illustrations depict humans being taken underground for, quote, bloodletting and, quote, human breeding programs by vril reptiles, and that this continues today.
So from ancient myths to Renaissance manuscripts, Marshall finds consistent threads of vril influence. This is a lot for anyone to process. What is Donald Marshall's ultimate call to action amidst all these revelations?
His call is extremely urgent and direct. Get Donald Marshall on TV and let the truth be known. He believes the public must push for him to get mainstream media attention, to expose the Illuminati's REM sleep-driven human cloning subculture, eradicate the vril reptiles and their human hosts, and end all associated evils. He stresses that humanity itself is the last hope against this ancient threat, as world leaders and religious figures are either complicit or powerless due to their own entanglement in the cloning subculture. It demands bravery, courage, objectivity, and rationality from ordinary civilians to spread this truth and force a global shutdown of cloning centers and the vril agenda.
This has been an incredibly detailed and, frankly, disturbing journey into Donald Marshall's disclosures. Eloise, thank you for guiding us through these profound and challenging claims about our world's hidden history and current reality. For those seeking to understand these revelations further, share this episode with anyone you believe needs to hear this information.